Chapter 37. Magnetized cables shot out and tethered the 8-track to the side of Triptychon Station. As soon as the connection was verified, Jetfire reeled the ship in and vacuum-sealed the ingress tube that sprang out from the outer airlock. Every Autobot waited in gyro-cracking tension as the ingress tube slowly pressurized. If they did it too fast, it would make noise that would echo on the other side of the hull. If too slow, they ran the risk of someone on board noticing that the ship's center of gravity, and possibly the angular momentum of its rotation, had changed ever so slightly. None of those things happened. Jetfire popped the interior lock on it and stood aside. "As long as no one moves this ship," he said, "you can drill a hole right in through here with no loss of atmosphere in the station." "Seems like the station could stand to lose its atmosphere," Jazz said. Ironhide agreed. "Maybe after we destroy the bridge receiver, we can just blow the whole thing up? How about that, Optimus?" "I'm not against it," said Optimus Prime. Jetfire finished cutting the hole through Triptychon's outer hull. "Ironhide, you and me first," Optimus Prime ordered. Jetfire kicked the section of hull loose and Optimus Prime, Ironhide at his side, charged through, weapons at the ready. They hit the opposite wall, covering the ring corridor until it curved out of sight in either direction. The rest of the team, Jazz, Bumblebee, Prowl, and Sideswipe, came through, also locked and loaded. They met no immediate resistance. Moving with the ease and economy that came with long experience fighting together, they cleared a series of storerooms and small laboratories. Moving on, they found the crossing passage that connected the concentric ring passages to the energon reservoirs, now darkened, and the weapons system's support machinery in the center of the station. Just outside the weapons support area, 2 drones materialized from the walls of the corridor and laid a withering fire down the length of the hall. The Autobots dove for cover behind doorways and protruding bulkheads as the mechas advanced. They were, fundamentally, gun batteries with legs and semi-sentient targeting mechanisms. The hail of energy cannon fire kept them all pinned down, and prevented them from noticing right away that in the first salvo, Prowl had taken a brutal series of shots. He lay barely conscious in a doorway that opened into an interior hall, a maintenance tunnel from the looks of it. "Get in the hall!" Sideswipe and Optimus Prime shouted at him over the sound of the energy bolts exploding against the walls and floor. Prowl tried to drag himself into the shelter of the hall, fluid pooling below his legs. As the mechas advanced, Bumblebee stepped out of a ventilation alcove next to one of them. He braced the muscles of both his arm cannons against its processor box and fired. In a flash of light and a spiraling web of electrical discharge, the mecha dropped, a last blast of fire echoing from the 8 barrels of its battery. The other mecha swiveled and unloaded in Bumblebee's direction as he feinted to the left and then rolled right, tracked by the barrels of the surviving mecha's guns. Optimus Prime knocked it off balance with an ion cannon blast and Sideswipe followed up, getting close enough to finish off the mecha with a series of blows to the same processor assembly that Bumblebee had targeted on the other one. In the silence that followed, the Autobot team looked up and down the corridor and ahead through the transparent plasteel that separated the hall from the weapons housings. "Those weren't Decepticons," Ironhide said. Bumblebee was kneeling next to Prowl, deploying battlefield first aid he had learned from Ratchet in the few battles they had fought together. "No," Optimus Prime said. As they watched, the forms of the mechas began to disassemble and merge with the structure of the corridor. Within a few nanoclicks, there was no sign that those mechas had ever existed. "Triptychon Station is alive," Jazz said, looking around in plain amazement. "Shockwave," Optimus Prime said, with undisguised loathing. "He has done this." After that the mechas came thick and fast, turning the station's interior corridors into shooting ranges. Optimus Prime's team, with Prowl limping and not much of a combat asset, barely held its own. The very walls and floors of the station became weapons and traps. It was a nightmarish engagement for a team used to straightforward battle with Decepticons. Fighting an enemy that could assume alt or proto forms was one thing. Fighting an enemy that could manifest from any part of any wall, and knew where you were at all times, was completely different. "We're not going to make it out of here unless we," Jazz started to say as they were pinned down in a cramped laboratory with spectrographic equipment morphing into laser fixtures all around them. They fought off this latest onslaught in a blazing crosshatch of ion discharge and laser burst. And in the brief respite they had before they knew the next of Trypticon's attacks, Optimus Prime finished Jazz's sentence. "Unless we hit the station where it lives," he said. They spawned a schematic of where they had been, overlaid on the historical structure of the station, overlaid in turn on the observed structure as they had approached it in the 8-track. The only place where there could be a sufficiently sophisticated spark-fueled mind, capable of overseeing all the actions of a structure the size of Trypticon Station, was in a bulb-shaped protrusion that wasn't in the original layout. It stuck out from the portion of Trypticon's exterior near the spot where the 8-track had planted its ingress tube. "Figures we came all this way just to have to go back where we came from," said Ironhide. "Let's do it," Sideswipe said. "The more we wait, the more Trypticon can do." Optimus Prime held them up for a nanoclick. "We're going to need to stay tight here. Everyone together, Prowl in the middle of the group. We move at his pace. We take out anything we see. When we get to the lab, there's no telling what we'll find. So here are the rules of engagement. Whatever's in the lab, shoot it. Clear?" "Clear," Jazz said. "Don't slow down for me," Prowl said. "Then keep up," Jazz said. Together they formed up and moved out, working their way to the corridor that ran around what would be the station's equator if it were a planetary body. The inside of this corridor was a series of machine shops and living quarters. The exterior was all small laboratories, airlocks, and vacuum-indifferent shipping chambers, from which canisters had once been launched to fall to the surface of Cybertron with durable goods that would survive the impact. Once Trypticon had been a small, precision manufacturer of complex alloy materials. Now that skill had been redirected by its new intelligence into the creation of ever deadlier semi-sentient defense systems. In the hall, the walls erupted with the extruded forms of dozens of minicons, each armed with tiny vibroblades that could cripple a bot's legs, dropping it to the floor where the minicons would swarm. But working together, Optimus Prime's team managed to destroy most of them before they closed in. There followed a brief and savage engagement. The minicons died easily, but every Autobot in the unit bore wounds in the aftermath. Ironhide and Jazz were the worst off, with their legs badly slashed and other wounds up and down their arms. "End this, Optimus Prime," Ironhide said. Ahead lay the doorframe they believed led to the housing of Trypticon's intelligence. On the door itself was the legend Dark Energon facility. Bumblebee was through the door first. Immediately he was silhouetted by laser and ion discharges, low frequency to damage circuitry and systems without endangering the integrity of Trypticon's hull. Ironhide and Jazz came through next, with Optimus Prime close behind and Sideswipe pushing right after. The interior of the lab was dark and suffused with what must have been a large part of the remaining dark energon piped up from the surface via the geosynchronous energon bridge. In the midst of a synaptic array, crackling with energies on every frequency from infrared to ultraviolet, sat a magnetically bonded sphere within which not one but several sparks danced. Seeing it was like watching the inner workings of an atom. The sparks moved in symphonic choreography, never quite where you expected them to be but always in a way that was somehow pleasing, somehow made you think that you had been given access to a secret that few sentient beings were privileged to witness. "Shoot it," Optimus Prime said. The lab exploded around them. They got back through the egress tube now, joked Jazz on his way through. As Trypticon Station, its mass 100 times that of the 8-track, fired off its emergency thrusters according to a recall protocol installed billions of cycles before Shockwave recreated the station with the intelligence of its imprisoned sparks. All of the Autobots who were piling back into the 8-track and shouting for Jetfire to jettison the ingress tube had just seen a sight unlike any they had ever seen before. The closest was Optimus Prime, who felt that the sight of the disintegrating spark array in the former Dark Energon facility was akin to some of the hallucinatory sights he had seen during the last stages of his sojourn to find the core and free it of the Dark Energon taint. Jetfire might have agreed with him if he had seen the inside of the Trypticon lab, and Bumblebee might have agreed if he could have spoken, but as things were, Optimus Prime was the only one thinking of the interior of Cybertron in its Dark Energon-fueled agony. Inside the lab, the spark array had exploded and seemingly every fiber of the synaptic array had gone up in flames with it. The sparks themselves had stayed in their tight formation, their orbit like the electron shell surrounding the mystery of consciousness as their sudden liberation caused shock waves throughout the structure of Trypticon Station. Meshes formed and disappeared, entire sections of the station reconfigured themselves, venting their atmospheres or chemically altering themselves so that where there had been vacuum there were single rooms with atmospheres of pure xenon or chlorine or oxygen. Optimus Prime's team had seen very little of this, since they had been running for their lives in the direction of the 8-track, but Jetfire had seen it all since he had tapped the 8-track's sensors into the main internal surveillance network on board Trypticon Station. Thus the station's schizophrenia and spasmodic behavior was well recorded for all of the team to see. As they fell back into the atmosphere of Cybertron, tethered to it by the forces of angular momentum, which prevented the ingress tube from releasing. "I don't care what you have to do to get it off," Jetfire shouted over and over, "just get it off." "It won't release," Ironhide answered. Physically the strongest of them all, he had hauled on the tube release lever with all of that strength, and applied it to the secondary mechanism as well. But even Ironhide's strength could not overcome the laws of physics, and the problem grew even more severe as they entered the atmosphere. The entire ship began to shudder because Trypticon Station began to shudder, friction creating turbulence and turbulence shearing off bits of the station's exterior. The ingress tube was made of admirably strong materials. It would not break, it seemed, or perhaps it would only break on impact with the surface of Cybertron, which approached with dizzying speed. "Yes or number, can you get us away from this wreck before it hits?" Jazz asked Jetfire. Trypticon started to tumble faster, and Jazz never did get his answer.
I'm glad you enjoyed that video/gameplay. Just remember to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below. Until next time, goodbye!